Hello! In this video, we're not going to be talking about the Kalam. You see, the Kalam is so popular and there are so many videos about it that if I made a video about the Kalam, no one would watch it. That's why, instead, this video is about, the chronoterminal argument for God. Yep, totally different. Now, this argument, like most arguments for theism, derives its strength from being able to predict certain pieces of evidence better than rival theories. However, to show that theism makes better predictions than rival theories, I'm going to need to find some rival theory to compare it to. For this series, I'm going to use naturalism for this role, because I have a lot of naturalist viewers, and it's also what I'm interested in. So, with that out of the way, let's jump into the chronoterminal argument for the existence of God, which again is totally maybe different from the Kalam. The way I'm going to structure this argument is that we'll begin by drawing out what the probability space looks like and which worldview predicts what, and then we scribble stretch based on the evidence we actually observe. Then, afterwards, I can actually give this argument a score of how powerful it is. So, let's jump into it. Here's our probability space. I'm going to draw it as if theism and naturalism are starting out as equally probable, and that there are no other possible worldviews, but that's just to make it easier to see what's going on. These assumptions are for illustrative purposes only, and will not affect the end result in any meaningful way. Let's now ask how strongly these worldviews, theism and naturalism, predict that our universe would have a beginning. Are there any reasons, unique to these respective worldviews, which would lead us to think that the universe began to exist or not? By universe, I mean all space, time, and matter. Now, at first glance, naturalism does not seem to make any unique prediction that the universe has a beginning, or that it did not have a beginning. There isn't much internal to the worldview that would lead us to expect one way or the other. So, when I subdivide naturalism into the universe began to exist, and the universe did not begin to exist, I'm going to draw these subdivisions as roughly the same size. However, one reason why we would move this bar up, that is, one reason naturalism would actually predict that the universe did not begin to exist, is that if the universe did begin to exist, then the naturalist would need to posit an additional entity in their worldview outside the universe which caused the universe to exist. A worldview that needs to posit more entities is less probable, so the most probable version of naturalism is the one that doesn't need to posit a cause of the universe. But on top of that, the naturalist would need to posit that the entity has very specific properties that the theist gets for free, such as this cause being spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. This further shifts naturalism towards predicting that the universe did not begin to exist. Now, this reasoning implicitly uses the premise of the totally different Kalam argument that anything that begins to exist has a cause. So why think this premise is true? Well, we haven't observed any counterexamples, and it's a very intuitive principle. If a small universe popped into existence ex nihilo in my living room, the first thing I would do is try to figure out what caused this to happen. Many will dispute appeals to intuitions like this, but I've already defended this sort of reasoning in previous videos, so we can now move along and take a look at the predictions that theism makes. Does theism predict that the universe began to exist? Why, yes it does. How so? Here's the short answer. If God exists, the universe isn't just an independent thing that exists on its own. It's going to be a thing which God created. And it makes sense how God could create a universe with a beginning, but it doesn't make sense how God could create a beginningless universe. Let's go through that more in depth. First, why couldn't the universe just be this independent entity that exists alongside God? Why does it have to be created by God? Well, I have three main reasons, but I'm going to go through them rather quickly because I don't expect this point to get a lot of pushback. 1. There's this property called divine aseity, which is the property of being the sole uncreated reality which grounds every other existing thing. This property seems like a good property, and since God is an axiological apex, he would have this property. 2. Positing more uncreated entities makes a theory worse. 3. Insert all the reasoning here in the contingency argument we'll look at later on. This subsequently leaves us with only two options given theism. Either we have a beginningless universe that was created by God, or a universe with a beginning that was created by God. The first option is problematic. How could a universe that has always been around be created by God? There technically isn't a contradiction in it or anything, but it's still very weird. If the universe began to exist, the causal structure of reality would be very straightforward. There's a chain of cause and effect that begins with God. If the universe never began to exist, the causal structure of reality would be like this. We start with God causing the universe to exist, and there's no next state, but after that there's a beginningless chain of causes and effects. The very nature of this kind of causation is counterintuitive, and we've never encountered any similar sort of causation. To draw out the counterintuitiveness further, I'm going to modify an analogy from Leibniz. Imagine that hypothetically the universe was infinitely old and I had a math textbook, which was a perfect copy of a previous textbook, which was itself a perfect copy of another textbook, which was itself a perfect copy of another textbook, and so on forever into the past. Now, can this textbook have an author? It's very hard to see how that would be possible. Similarly, it's very hard to see how an infinitely old universe could be created by God. At the very least, it would require that we posit a completely new form of causation or sustaining or whatever that we've never seen before. For these reasons, we would predict that if theism were true, the universe would have a beginning. So now that we've gone over what the theories predict, let's now ask, did the universe actually begin to exist? Well, I wasn't there, but we can look to modern physics for some help. Now, it's important to note that our best physical models of the universe don't say the universe began to exist. Rather, our best models simply break down if we try to extend them too far into the past. So, the data we're going to base our scribble stretching on is going to be that, the specific fact that our best models of the universe break down in the past. You see, the reason we've been talking about the beginning of the universe so much is that it predicts very, very strongly that our best models of the universe would break down at some point in the past. Namely, the point when the universe began to exist. There wouldn't be anything before that point, so it would be surprising if our best model could be extended past that point. On the other hand, the proposition that the universe did not begin to exist does not predict that our models would break down. There shouldn't be a problem with a physical model being infinitely extendable if the physical universe is actually infinitely old. Sure, it's possible that our universe could be beginningless and our best model still breaks down due to some flaw in the model or something, but it's not predicted nearly as strongly. In fact, our best model of the universe used to be infinitely extendable into the past. If the universe was actually beginningless, it would have been totally reasonable to expect it to just continue to not break down as the theory got more and more developed. But this did not happen. So this is what our probability space looks like. This is what our theories predict. And when we scribble out every section of the probability space where our best model of physics breakdown in the past is false, then we see that more of naturalism was scribbled out than theism. So when we stretch back to a square, the probability of theism has grown. Coolio. Now, if we rewind a bit, some theists will try and scribble out more of the probability space where the universe did not begin to exist, by rousing intuitions against this proposition. This usually takes the form of Hilbert's Hotel or the Grim Reaper paradox, scenarios which both include an infinite number of entities and result in absurdity. Although I used to champion such arguments, I've since found them wanting. The problem is that, although I think appealing to intuition is usually legitimate, we can also recognize that sometimes our intuitions are misguided. Our evaluations of these thought experiments would appear to be one such scenario. Our intuitions are trained on a daily basis to help us to navigate our interactions with a finite number of finite objects. If our intuitions throw a hissy fit whenever they're evaluating scenarios with infinities in them, then this can easily be explained as a reflection of how our intuitions were trained through everyday finite experience, rather than an actual problem with these infinite scenarios. So with that out of the way, I'm now going to assign a score to the strength of the chronoterminal argument. This can be done by taking the percentage of the theism section of the probability space, which was not scribbled out, and dividing it by the percentage of the naturalism section of the probability space, which was not scribbled out. So, for an example, if a hypothetical argument for theism led to 20% of theism being scribbled out, leaving 80% remaining, and 60% of the naturalism side was scribbled out, leaving 40% remaining, then the score of this argument would be 80% divided by 40%, which equals 2. The reason why it's useful to assign a score to arguments in this way is that we can then treat the entire cumulative case for theism as one big argument with a score equal to all the scores of the individual arguments multiplied together. So, what is the score of the chronoterminal argument for God's existence? Well, this is of course subjective, but I personally find the score of this argument to be somewhere around 1.5. While that's pretty okay, that is by no means the strongest argument we'll be looking at in this series. However, the point of a cumulative case is not to prove theism in one fell swoop, but to build up a ton of arguments that cumulatively lead to the truth of theism. So with that said, let's press on in this series and look at some more arguments. See you in the next video.